We are going to be right back. First, another September 11th postscript. Kimalaya Nyoma is a medical student at Stanford University. He's a member of the Maasai tribe in Kenya. After seeing the September 11th attacks, he returned to Kenya and told his tribe about the destruction. The Maasai had trouble with the concept of collapsed skyscrapers and thousands of deaths, but they wanted to fulfill their duty as warriors. 9 months after the attacks, the Maasai blessed 14 cows and gave them as cherished gifts to an American diplomat in Kenya.
When we come back, New York firemen and policemen honor their fallen comrades in a most unusual way. Plus, they had to help in any way they could, meet the unsung heroes of 9/11. And where did all the money go? Billions were donated to 9/11 disaster relief funds. But is the money going to where it's needed most? Then, in tonight's special coverage, Diane Sawyer with stories of 61 mothers and 63 precious reasons for hope. 9/11 continues on ABC. From ABC News, this is 9/11.
So most everybody has left Ground Zero in New York now, and it's similarly true at the Pentagon. The people are still gathered at Shanksville in Pennsylvania, but they have left this. This was called the Ring of Honor, the Circle of Honor, early this morning, and you can see now it reminds one a little bit of so many places in the country after September 11th a year ago, including Union Square here in New York and all around Ground Zero, people just leaving things. And you see very close, could we go back to that just for 1 second? Because if you notice in the foreground, in the ring, in the foreground here, you see they brought pictures again of their kin. And one of the most painful experiences for New Yorkers a year ago today was relatives going all over the city holding pictures of their relatives. Have you seen this man? Have you seen this woman? My husband is lost. And you went everywhere, and they were on railings all around Ground Zero, and they were on railings in the public squares. And by way of tribute today, they have brought them back to put them in that Circle of Honor at Ground Zero, where there were really moving ceremonies today, and where all of the names were read. Some of them, of course, who died so absolutely heroic. We want to talk, actually, in this half hour about the heroes of September 11th, and there were many of them. I found a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson the other day, who once wrote, "Heroism feels and never reasons, and therefore is always right." And as we know, the tragedy made heroes of hundreds of firefighters and the rescue workers, but there were also many stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, unsung heroes who felt the need to help. We asked our correspondent Michelle Norris to put together a piece on two people. One is a bouncer, and the other is an architect.
It was like a magnet. I was pushed or pulled towards World Trade Center.
I showed them my Red Cross certification card. They said, "Yeah, we need you. Let's go." Get on the truck, and they drove me in.
On the morning of September 11th, most New Yorkers tried to get as far away as possible from the World Trade Center. But Mike Ballone and Yershi Bodnik had the opposite instinct.
I heard a lot about you.
Both men fought to reach Ground Zero, desperate to help. Mike Ballone, a 300-pound nightclub bouncer from Brooklyn, hitched a ride into Manhattan on a fire truck.
That was my goal. I wanted to pull one person out alive.
In another part of Brooklyn, Yershi Bodnik saw the inferno from a construction site. An architect and structural engineer, he immediately recognized that the towers were likely to topple.
My reaction was to just grab my hard hat, and I took a portable radio, flashlight, and started walking across Brooklyn Bridge.
At Ground Zero, Bodnik joined rescue workers and civilian volunteers, sifting through the rubble with their bare hands.
We were finding nothing but expired bodies and body parts and all kinds of stuff I'd never seen before.
Mike Ballone threw himself into the rescue effort, a big man who turned out to be a big asset.
The firemen that I came in with, they said, Mike, what we really need you to do, since you're a pretty big guy, is we're going to need you to come in with us and just help us lift the girders to see who we can find. And that's what I did. I just started lifting up beams and helping them jump into the voids, into the holes where the windows used to be.
Hello? The work was both grueling and gruesome, but Ballone couldn't imagine being anywhere else.
And he saw a lot of things which a lot of people haven't seen in their lifetime. And he helped. He didn't flinch. He stayed there right through.
Ballone quickly became an indispensable volunteer. He learned how to operate heavy excavation tools. He was the fixer.
I call him the angel of the pit because his answer to anything you need done is no problem.
Iron Man. Mike is the Iron Man of the Trade Center.
During 9 months of recovery and cleanup, Ballone never left the pit for more than a few hours. On Saturday nights, he faithfully returned to Brooklyn.
Hi, D-girls.
Reporting for work at the Legacy Disco. But the rest of the week belonged to Ground Zero. Ballone even slept just steps from the site in St. Paul's Church.
I would rather sleep on the pew than the cot. The cot was too comfortable. If I slept in the pew, I would only get a couple of hours sleep. So this way I would get back up without any problem.
Along the way, he found a new family, adopted by the tight brotherhood of grieving New York firefighters.
I think I should get a medal or a statue. I mean, there's a lot of people that should get medals and statues. But, you know, he was special.
I got a chance to make and to work with the greatest men on earth, who hold down the greatest job on earth, fire department. Those guys, man, I love them.
Ballone's sheer brawn served him well in the pit, but things were different for Jerzy Bodnik. A Czechoslovakian immigrant who defected to America 15 years ago, Bodnik was determined to help a city he'd come to love. He simply lacked the stomach for work in the pit.
There were a ton of people helping with their hands and, you know, looking through the debris, and I thought, how can I help that would really make a difference?
With his architectural training, Bodnik realized what rescue workers needed most, a visual tool to spot stairwells, elevator shafts, air pockets.
So I knew that we shouldn't be just kind of randomly looking through this pile of debris. We should locate and exactly pinpoint the areas where survivors can still, you know, be alive.
Bodnik remembered that his college, Cooper Union, kept a set of detailed plans for Lower Manhattan in the school's library. The problem, the school, like most of Manhattan, was closed. So he tracked down the college president at home.
On Saturday morning, following September 11th, I was in my house, which is right down the street, in my bathrobe, and, you know, in the midst of this tension and so on, and the bell rings, and there's a stranger at my door.
And he says, "Who are you?" So I showed him my pass, and I said, "I'm Jerzy Bodnik, and I need your help."
It was very intense, very eager, very enthusiastic, and was clearly a man with a mission.
With plans in hand, Bodnik constructed an architectural model that helped rescue workers make sense of the mountain of debris.
He put together first a cardboard model to help people understand what was both above ground and what was also below ground.
But he still wanted to do more, so he quit his engineering job to create a project called Brainstorm. The goal? Build a three-dimensional model of Ground Zero using computer animation.
It was just total mess. Can you imagine 70 feet of debris? This model kind of helped to orientate everybody.
Through site visits and countless interviews with rescue workers, Bodnik and his team created a stunning visual tool to pinpoint danger zones.
Recreating
A deadly mistake.
And what would happen if they were to just pull this building away is this wall would then start to fall down and start causing problems for some of the lower floors that were down below there. There was lots of firemen that were down there looking for other firemen or any survivors, and they could have all been killed by these falling slabs.
Bodnik developed the 3D model hoping that it would help find survivors. There were none. but it did protect against a further loss of life.
It's an amazing feat, and to be able to say that all that was done without another fatality is amazing.
Even though the recovery effort is officially over, both men maintain strong ties to Ground Zero. Bodnick is fine-tuning his computer model to help other cities prepare for disaster.
And we don't want to have another situation where everybody's running around as like we have no set of plans.
Ballone, meanwhile, talks to school children about September 11th.
That's what helped us. Your cards and letters, your support.
And he has earned a new title, Safety Director for the New York Fire Department. Both men are too modest to call their work heroic, but those who labored alongside them see it quite differently. Michelle Norris, ABC News, New York.
I want to meet two people now who've been sitting here watching this piece. On my immediate right is Fred Eichler, who was the Senior Vice President at Accelera. Accelera. Yeah. Company's gone out of business since 9/11, but yes. Fred got off the 83rd floor, and next to him, Jonathan Judd, who actually had his office on the 85th floor, working for a law firm, but was in an elevator and got out at the 83rd floor. And first of all, we're just very grateful both of you have come. I'll ask you about that, but I just wonder, you know, I was just sitting here watching out of the corner of my eye the Michelle Norris report, and I noticed you were too. How do you feel when you watch all this stuff on television, these recreations, other people talking about it, Jonathan?
It's a little overwhelming. I mean, you are constantly reliving what happened, but somehow I've managed to deal with it pretty well somehow. I think it's because it's so enormous that it just has never completely sunk in.
Are there any benefits to reliving it as often as you've been obliged to? Except one benefit, surely, is the fact that you survived it.
Well, that's there's no doubt about that. But I think it's good on an anniversary like this that so many people have been calling me and emailing me and showing so much support, and that's really therapeutic. And that happened immediately after this occurred as well. So I'm really thankful to all those people.
Fred?
Basically feel the same. Today has been a tougher day than I expected. But, I mean, over the year, it's been difficult to try to get away from it, especially living in New York. You're constantly reminded of, you know, the attack and everything else.
And who you are as part of our history.
Absolutely.
Today was tougher. I'm not the slightest bit surprised, but tell us why.
Just reliving what had happened. One of the events of that day was I actually saw the plane hit the building.
I know you did. Just amazed.
And as soon as it hit, our corridor became an inferno, and we were trapped in our office. And right about that time, my wife called, my parents called, and my daughter Michelle called. And I never told them what the situation really was, but I honestly thought that's going to be the last time I'm going to speak to them. So, you know, that's been flashing through my mind pretty often today.
Jonathan, you both got out of the 83rd floor in the North Tower, and not a lot of people got out from that high up. Do you mind telling us how?
Would you like me to start with how?
I'd like you to start wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay. Well, I was in an elevator. I worked on the 85th floor, and on 83, I was kind of leaning against the side of the elevator because I hadn't had much sleep. My daughter, Jordana, was just born 6 weeks before, and she had been up during the night, so I was really out of it, and all of a sudden I heard this whoosh as soon as this person got off on 83, and I looked up and I saw the 3 elevators directly across from me in the same elevator bank were in flames. They exploded, and some of the doors were askew on the elevator shafts. If I had been in one of those, I probably would have died instantly. True. And I ran immediately for the first place where I didn't see any fire, which was Fred's office. And people later asked me, why didn't you try to run right out the stairway? Well, you couldn't, because the entire lobby area was on fire, and I didn't want to go anywhere near there. So I ran in, and that's how I met Fred, the hard way.
And Fred, how did you guys find the stairway?
Well, we were trapped in our office for, it turns out, about 45 minutes, until about 9:30. But backing up about 15 minutes, when what we now know was the second plane, when that hit, we didn't know what it was. And we heard this massive explosion, and we thought the floors above us were caving in on us. At that point, we did try to get out, and the sprinkler system had doused the flames somewhat in the lobby. And we started...
This is in the lobby on 83.
On 83, right outside our front doors. And as we were walking to what we believed was the stairwell, and we got probably maybe 5 feet from it, and then all the lights went out. And we could not see whether it was a stairwell, a closet, or anything else. So we said, well, we're going to go back to our office and hopefully be rescued. Basically, the decision was go back and either be rescued or die.
And you were rescued, Jonathan?
Yes. Yeah.
How?
It was a miracle, as far as I'm concerned. After waiting there for quite a long time, we were in an office where there were glass doors, thankfully, because there was so much smoke out in the hallway. We finally saw these 2 beams of light shining, and the 2 people came with flashlights and said, "Get out of here right now, leave everything, and let's go." And I never knew who they were, but Fred told me that one was a fireman and one was a Port Authority officer, and they continued on their way up trying to help other people, so I don't believe that they made it out.
But it was, as I know, Fred, because of the glass door, and you saw the policeman's flashlight.
Yes, I saw
Other people behind other doors did not see the
Right.
flashlight.
I saw the beam of light, and as Jonathan said, they came into our office. They said, drop whatever you have. And the stairwell from 83 to 78 was absolutely treacherous. And in fact, I almost slipped 2 or 3 times. And we got to the 78th floor, went through the lobby, the door into the skyline.
78th floor of the North Tower is where there is basically a lobby where a lot of the elevators in the North Tower actually converge, and it was beyond belief at that point.
There were some people in it, you know, and then we walked along the elevator bank to the other end of the building and started our way down from 78. We got to the 5th floor, and the whole stairwell filled up with smoke. And at that point, we were stopped for, I don't know, could have been 10 minutes, and we were taken to another stairwell where we waited. And then the fire department split the group up. Some went back to the original stairwell, and some stayed at the new one. And we got down to the lobby, and I know I walked out of the building about 4 minutes before it collapsed.
You know, it's true. I feel very self-conscious about imposing on you both today, Jonathan. And it's true. We all want to hear your stories
I'd rather tell the story than the alternative.
Yeah, and we want to hear your story over and over again. When you finally got, just last question for you. When you finally got to the bottom, what was it like?
Well, I came out in what was the lobby at one point, but I didn't recognize it. There was no chrome, no glass, no marble. It looked like Hiroshima. That's what it looked like. And I couldn't believe it. And I said to myself, if the plane crashed so high up, how could the lobby look like this? And I didn't know that the other tower came down. That must have been the reason why it looked like that. But never in my wildest dreams did I think that that could even happen. It didn't even cross my mind. So everybody was yelling, run out, run out. And there was a big beam coming out of the wall, swinging. And everyone was saying, run, run. And I said, the beam's going to hit me. There was a woman there wearing high-heeled shoes, and she said, I can't even walk on this, much less run. And I grabbed her arm. I dragged her across the lobby, and we got out through a broken window on the bottom.
Today, and so we're going to see you both again this evening. But I hope it's helped today to tell. Is it helped to tell the story?
Yes.
Yeah, as you said, the alternative is so. Participate with us on tape tonight, on this program tonight in our primetime coverage. And it's they're both quite stunning. The lives of others ahead of his own. A selflessness that was very evident in so many places that day. But with his story, here's ABC's Judy Muller.
Michael Wright, a telecommunications salesman, works in a high-rise office building in Manhattan. His days seem fairly routine.
Can you let him know that Michael Wright from Focal, just returning his phone call?
But for Michael, no day will ever be routine again. On September 11th, his former company was located on the 81st floor of No. 1 World Trade Center. At 8:48 that morning, he happened to be in the restroom.
When it hit, it was so loud and so percussive and so close by that the only thing I thought it could be would be a gas main. or something like that blowing up.
And then he looked out the restroom door.
Elevator bank between where our bathroom was and the office had blown out, and there were flaming chunks of material all over.
The 30 or so employees from his office were staggering into the hallway.
And I was just screaming, get out, stairways are that way. They were stunned, and obviously various, some people were crying, some people were in shock, some people really didn't know what was going on.
Nobody knew what was going on.
No one knew what was going on.
As they made their way down the stairwell from the 81st floor, they were joined by others.
We saw people come down who were burned. Some of them fairly severely, but, nothing to lead me to believe the gravity of what had occurred.
In fact, says Michael, it almost felt like a fire drill until they got their first hint of what had happened.
As we were walking down, there was a gentleman with a BlackBerry, and he was the first to tell us that a plane had hit the building. And in my mind's eye, I was picturing a Cessna.
Almost everyone, he says, was trying to call home. Michael's wife, Jenny, and 5-month-old son, Ben, were visiting his parents in Boston. Getting in touch with them became his primary focus.
My cell phone was at my desk, so that did me no good. I tried everyone's cell phone around me, but I just wasn't able to get through.
And then came word that a plane had crashed into World Trade Center number 2 next door.
Yeah, I never heard the second plane hit. I heard from the same gentleman who had the BlackBerry that the second plane had hit, though.
And then they knew it had to be a terrorist attack, and that it might not be over. About halfway down on the 40th floor, they started running into firemen coming up the stairs.
One, individuals in particular, I can still picture his face, and you could tell he knew damn well what he was going into, and it frightened him.
Do you wonder what happened to him?
I have a pretty good idea.
Didn't get out?
I can't imagine he did.
A rescue worker asked if anyone in the stairwell knew CPR and would be willing to escort the weak and elderly down the stairs. Michael volunteered.
When we'd escort people down a number of flights of stairs, and we were the last two to leave the stairwell because we stayed back and we waited a few minutes, and then it was obvious that no one else was coming down. So
it never occurred to you that those minutes might mean the difference between life and death for you?
No.
Not until he exited the stairs at the mezzanine level did he begin to really understand.
At that point, I looked out and I saw out onto the plaza, and that's when I knew sort of the gravity of.
What did you see?
I saw, fire. I saw body parts. I saw, I saw the human toll. As soon as I realized the stuff I didn't want to see, I was running for the escalator. At that point, there were some people coming out of another stairwell, and I was screaming, "Don't look outside. Don't look outside." Let it all out there, like, uncontrollably. It was like, that was when I finally, as soon as I felt safe, is when I finally kind of let go of everything I'd experienced that day.
Michael was soon reunited with Jenny. Because his eyes were still bandaged, he could not see her.
And she handed me my son, and he was making those happy, wiggly noises that babies make, so I knew he was happy, and it felt so good to hold him.
Hey, buddy! Michael commutes to and from the city now, from a bucolic town north of Manhattan.
Come here, buddy.
An ordinary commuter with an extraordinary sense of gratitude.
You realize how lucky you are in a lot of ways. Not lucky in that I escaped a horrible day. I'm lucky in that I had this life to be able to look at. I'm lucky because I had these things before I ever stepped foot in that building.
Judy Muller, ABC News, New York.
Another wonderful story. Before all this began, people had a lot of discussion about what kind of stories would people want to hear today, what kind of stories would survivors want to tell, what kind of stories would help people get through, what would not be exploitive, etc. And there's a moment in that report from Judy Miller where Michael says he has never been able to find the firefighter who helped him through the Borders bookstore underneath and got him out to the street no matter how hard he's tried. One of the really interesting things the last year is how many people have ended up being connected because their story has been in the public, either in the newspaper or on television or radio, and they've made connections that they would not have simply on their own.
I needed something. I needed to do something for me.
A tattoo is a way to keep his lost loved one close.
This is the photo that I actually used, and this is what he wound up doing. Such detail, her eyes, the coloring.
His daughter Michelle worked on the 97th floor of the South Tower. He says he never would have considered a tattoo before 9/11, but that's changed. For him, everything has changed.
I can't hold a hand, you know, I can't touch it, but I can touch this.
I think certain people would say that they are showing something on their outside that has permanently affected their inside. They, in some ways, both carry it and move beyond it at the same time.
I have a piece of my heart that's gone. It's back. To a certain degree, it's back.
Chris Cuomo, ABC News.
Yeah, there's so much debate about tattooing these days, sometimes referred to when kids get them as a lifetime reminder of a momentary whim. But here is an instance where the intention of having a tattoo is to have a lifetime reminder. We welcome back John Miller, who covers the police and the fire department for us and has for so long. John, you know an awful lot of firefighters, and because we're talking about firefighters there, a lot of them do feel guilty, don't they?
They do, and I mean, you talk to regular folks and they say, boy, I was lucky, that could have been me. A lot of firefighters I spoke to had the opposite feeling. They said, you know, that should have been me instead of him, especially the ones, and this is very common in the New York City Fire Department, who had traded shifts with brother officers that day. There was a lot of that.
You may not know this, I don't, but I know that a lot of firefighters have not gone back to work for various health reasons. And I don't know the numbers in the police. I think it's more than 700 firefighters have not gone back for that reason. Do you know of a lot in either the fire department or the police department who have not gone back because they are still too disturbed by the whole thing?
I know a lot who have gone back and then had to leave, saying, I thought I could do it, but I couldn't do it. I also know that from the police side, they're retiring in droves this year at a much higher rate than before.
In this long debate this year about whether the country has changed or how has it changed, and the people on both sides, of course, one of the most consistent arguments is about this question of here so far to be prepared to sacrifice some of their civil liberties in the name of security. But there is quite an intense debate beginning, or the debate is become more intense. On the West Coast, their lead editorials deal with civil liberties. The New York Times says, among other things, to curtail individual rights, as the Bush administration has done, is to draw which has a big editorial called Self-Inflicted Wounds about rights and the new reality. It says, even in wartime, America is not a dictatorship. They're much more in-depth than that. But it certainly is a reminder that this debate is going on in the country with increasing intensity. With a report on that, here's ABC's Jackie Judd.
Attorney General Ashcroft moved aggressively after the attacks, expanding the executive branch's legal authority to root out terror suspects. He ordered the roundup of about 1,200 mostly Middle Eastern men, many whose identities and deportation hearings were kept secret. The creation of military tribunals with broad authority to impose the death penalty. The indefinite detention of American citizens as enemy combatants. Today, Ashcroft is certain he has taken the right course.
So this isn't a competition between freedom and security. The security, its purpose is to secure freedom.
Critics say it is a competition, and the very freedom and civil liberties Ashcroft is trying to protect are in jeopardy.
The government has
run roughshod over, virtually every right in the Constitution other than the right to bear arms has been infringed in the name of this war on terrorism.
Some courts are now reeling in the Justice Department. For example, a federal appeals court ruled against the secret deportation hearings, warning that democracy dies behind closed doors. The Justice Department may appeal.
And the administration is arguing before another skeptical judge that it has an absolute right to label suspects as enemy combatants.
That label means Jose Padilla and Yasser Hamdi, both U.S. citizens and both suspected of aiding the enemy, are being held in virtual isolation in military prisons with none of the rights they would have in civilian courts. Frank Dunham is trying to represent Hamdi.
You just sit there in your little jail cell with no family, no friends, no lawyer, no nothing till this is over because we deemed to put that label on you. That's a pretty scary proposition.
The administration has backpedaled on some initiatives, including a proposed domestic surveillance program called TIPS and a military tribunal's power to hand out the death sentence. But a conservative ally says no one should believe the Justice Department is rethinking how it fights the enemy.
The administration has chosen its side of the legal track, and it is staying there because its conception of where they are is this is a war, we need to prevent the next attack, and to some degree to worry about whether or not we've gotten the law right a bit later.
Getting the law right now or later, a debate that is a legacy of September 11th. Jackie Judd, ABC News, Washington.
In this nation of laws, it is hard to tell where this argument is going to take us in the months ahead, but it is certainly very American to have it. And I don't want to embroil our commentator, George Stephanopoulos, to any greater degree than is fair to anybody, but just tell me this, George, at this point.
What's going to happen is you're going to see some more scaling back, some more reining in of the powers that the administration and the executive branch took in the early days after September 11th, and which, frankly, September 11th, Congress pretty much codified a lot of the actions that the administration took on their own. Now you're starting to see questions from Democrats and Republicans in the Congress. And as Jackie Judd pointed out in her piece, the courts are starting to scale back, and it may even get to the Supreme Court.
There is some embarrassment at Congress that they gave the administration quite as blank a check as they did. And do you really believe that this will, A, get to the Supreme Court? I think most people do. And do you think quickly?
I think there is one question that should get to the Supreme Court. I'm not sure about the timetable, and that's the question of whether or not these American citizens like Yasser Hamdi and Jose Padilla can be held indefinitely without even the chance to make their case. A lot of legal commentators, most prominently Stuart Taylor in the National Journal, have pointed out that at a bare minimum, they should at least be able to present their case and answer the charge of whether or not they're an enemy combatant. The lower courts seem to indicate that they thought the administration had gone too far, and that should get to the Supreme Court.
Thank you, George. George Stephanopoulos in Washington, joining us periodically in the course of this day and in this evening. We will be back in a moment to continue our coverage, but here is another September 11th postscript. This is about a man named John Labriola. He was a Port Authority worker who was having a meeting on the 71st floor of the North Tower, and he had his camera with him.
To get out. And there was already people walking in that stairwell, and we just joined the stream of people who were walking down. I actually didn't take my camera out for the first half hour or so, and I didn't even remember I had it until I started seeing the firemen coming up. Were willing to risk their lives for others and sacrifice themselves in the ultimate way. And how difficult that was. I still can't get my head around that. It was heroic. People were unbelievably gracious to each other. In the stairs, didn't matter what color. That building. And they all carried themselves in a state of grace.
When we come back,
Where did all the money go? Billions were donated to 9/11 relief funds. But is the money going to where it's needed most? Plus, how has the past year changed George Bush as our president, as a man? And in tonight's special Inside the Towers, the decisions made by some that meant life or death. 9/11 continues.
I pray you'll be alright.
And help us to be wise in times when we don't. Let this be our prayer.
Let this be our prayer.
When we lose our way,
Guide us through each day.
lead us to a place.
Guide us with your grace. Give us faith so we'll be saved.
Now reporting from New York, Peter Jennings.
We want to talk in this half hour about money. Those of us who have lived in other parts of the world know without a shadow of a doubt that this is the volunteer nation. Volunteerism exists in other countries, but nowhere does it exist to the degree that it does in the United States. And two out of three Americans gave money to help the victims. More than $2 billion was raised by 300 charities. At least that's the best we can do with the number. And of course there were problems. Here's ABC's Cynthia McFadden.
We are forever indebted to the courage of Captain Timothy Stackpole.
When actress Meg Ryan introduced the widow and children of firefighter Timothy Stackpole at the benefit concert for the city of New York, the crowd cheered the fallen hero as his family tried to choke back tears.
Hug. You felt cared for, you felt loved, you knew you were going to survive.
And with that outpouring of love came a deluge of donations, from telethons and celebrity appeals, donate money, to piggy banks and fire boots.
Thank you very much, sir.
The final tally? More than $2.3 billion. But it would turn out to be a lot harder to give it away. All the money raised, an ABC News survey of 11 major charities shows that about 38 cents on each dollar went to the families of those killed or injured in the form of cash aid. About 32 cents on the dollar was spent on people who lost jobs and others affected by the attacks, as well as services like mental health counseling and legal aid. But that leaves a vast sum, 30 cents on our dollar, or about $690 million. That has not yet been spent. A year ago, this warehouse was filled with grieving family members applying for help. But did the money go where it was most needed, where the public wanted it to go? The answer may be no. A poll by the Chronicle of Philanthropy reveals that 42% of the American public say they have less confidence in charities now than they did before the attack. While dozens of families tell ABC News they are mostly satisfied with the charity's response, a snapshot of 3 families reveals how hard it is to meet both the donors' expectations and the victims' needs. Timothy Stackpole was a captain in the New York City Fire Department.
I didn't want them to die, and look what we got.
For many Americans, it was heroes like Timmy Stackpole who inspired them to donate money. In 1998, he was burned on 30% of his body after rushing into a building to save lives.
I remember just praying to God, just let me die bravely.
He absolutely could have retired and didn't have to work, but he wanted to. That's what he was about.
He was just back, promoted to captain, the day before the planes hit the World Trade Center.
Nobody becomes a fireman to make money. The reason they could do what they did was because they knew that if, God forbid, something happened to them, their families would be taken care of.
As the widow of a firefighter killed in the line of duty, Tara Stackpole knew she was entitled to a $250,000 death benefit and her husband's salary for life. What she didn't count on was the kindness of strangers.
I just couldn't believe that had I wake up in this position, that people felt the need to help me and my family.
It's estimated that the families of the 343 firefighters who died will each receive, on average, over $1 million from charitable organizations. Most other families who lost a loved one will receive a fraction of that, about $175,000. Why? In part because nearly 20% of the money raised, close to $485 million, was given to charities exclusively for the survivors of the uniformed rescue workers.
There have been people who say, look, the firefighters' families are getting too much.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
It's uncomfortable. You know, you feel guilty, you feel like people are watching you all the time. I've heard people say that, oh, the fire widows, they've hit lotto. I mean, that's disgusting. Walk in my shoes for a day and then tell me I hit lotto.
Steve Russin was a bond trader at Cantor Fitzgerald.
He loved children, the toys, the games.
Boom! Big shit up the middle, yeah!
A doting father to his son, Alec, Russin would never meet his twin daughters. They were born 4 days after the towers fell. Andrea Russin never dreamed she would be raising their children alone.
I had formula. I had diapers, so many diapers that I was going to have to buy. And a lot of things that my husband and I had planned for that I was thinking I wasn't going to be able to afford.
With help from caseworkers, Russin spent hours every day pursuing both corporate and charitable donations. In addition to a nanny to help with the twins, the charities have paid for Russin's mortgage, utilities, counseling, day camp, and baby formula for the past year.
I love you too, Daddy.
Still, she wonders if she did enough.
Maybe if I had gone through, spent more time and found more bills, I would have been able to get more. It's all, and so some of it is a game.
A frustrating one, especially since she feels the firefighter families receive special treatment.
It's very hurtful to my husband's memory that 3,000 people are not always thought of, and that 300 people have been glorified as heroes.
Russin says she received about $195,000 from 35 different charities. She will also receive her husband's life insurance and Social Security benefits, plus up to $100,000 and health coverage for 10 years from her husband's company.
We're not going out and buying yachts and Lamborghinis with this. We're raising our children forever.
Antonio Melendez was an illegal alien who made less than $18,000 a year working in the kitchen at Windows on the World.
I have to stand on my own 2 feet. If I fall, it's like my husband fell. It's like the Twin Towers falling all over again.
For a week after the attacks, Julia Hernandez searched desperately for her childhood sweetheart and common-law husband, Antonio. He was the family's sole source of support.
You're 28 years old, you have 4 little children, and you're here in this country illegally. Was there a point that you went and asked for help?
Yes, the super came and said the rent's due. I was already a month behind. That's when I went to ask for help with all my expenses.
Hernandez, who speaks almost no English, had no idea what aid she was entitled to or even how to apply.
It's hard because you go to places and they don't speak Spanish. And plus, going with all the kids, and then you take the little one and he gets a little restless and he starts crying.
Nevertheless, Hernandez says she has received about $95,000, plus money for rent, phone, and utilities from 4 major charities. She also gets Social Security benefits, health care coverage for 5 years, counseling, and $15,000 from a life insurance policy provided by Windows on the World.
I haven't lost hope, but I am worried because of my children, for their future.
3 widows, 3 vastly different sums. Is it fair?
It's not fair. In my house, if you have a loaf of bread, we split it up 5 ways, and everybody eats the same. We are all equal.
There is a simplicity that is appealing about taking the pie, dividing it very simply. On the other hand, there's an equally appealing argument that let's try to figure out who needs what so we can make sure the money goes to those who actually need it.
The problem is need itself is a slippery concept, especially after 9/11, when so many victims were so well off. What charities have traditionally tried to do is maintain a family's way of life at the time the tragedy struck, at least in the short run, which is why the widow of a bond trader might have a nanny paid for, while the widow of an undocumented kitchen worker would not. But Andrea Rustin and some other family members we talked to are concerned about something else. Remember, 62% of the money, or $1.4 billion, either hasn't been distributed yet or isn't going directly to the families at all in the form of cash aid.
The American public was so generous and so thoughtful, and I know that they knew about my children and all those other children out there. Where is our trust going to be after this whole thing is over if this money doesn't go to these children?
But the charities point out it wasn't just the children who lost a parent who were affected by September 11th. There are thousands of other victims, like the 55,000 displaced workers, who they also want to help. And there is planning for the future. The United Way, for example, is setting aside $200 million, or nearly half of the money it raised, for the long-term needs of victims, families, and communities.
There is a tension. There are frustrations. There are folks who think that they are rightful beneficiaries who are coming in and saying, we want the money spent immediately. There are others who are saying, let's slow it down to make sure we do it right. Each of these is a logical argument, and the charities are trying to do the right thing.
But what is the right thing?
Something special for the boys to have someday.
Yeah. For families who lost loved ones like Timothy Stackpole, Steve Russin, and Antonio Melendez, there is no easy answer. The only thing that's certain is that the cost of September 11th can never be measured in dollars alone.
If I could put it all together and hand it back to all of them and have Timmy back, I would do that in a heartbeat. They couldn't pay me enough money. Nobody could pay us enough money to replace what we lost.
3 extraordinary families, Peter. You know, one of the great controversial issues is the money that has yet to be spent, the 30 cents on every dollar, as we reported. In doing this report, we talked to the officials who were responsible for monies in Oklahoma City, and they pointed out that they felt it was very important to hold back some of the money because 7 years after Oklahoma City, they're still finding expenses for counseling and other kinds of services that the victims of that tragedy needed.
Well, that's really interesting. I know you're not going anywhere because I want to talk about government in just a moment, but before you do, I want to introduce Daniel Borokoff, who is the president of the American Institute of Philanthropy based in Chicago, and you're basically a watchdog organization, aren't you? You try to keep your eye on charities to see how they're doing. Just a simple question first and a short one. Is there charity fatigue?
Well, disaster fatigue can certainly set in with something as big as this, and that's why we hope there's not another big disaster that happens so soon after the one disaster, because people do start to get fatigued. But
and while I would never want to make the judgment about whether people get enough money, if people need money in America today who've been in some way victimized by this, can they almost invariably get access to money?
most of them can, but what we're concerned about is the disparity, as you brought out in the piece, that certain victims, certain classes of victims, particularly the brave firefighters and rescue workers, are getting about $1.2 million, whereas you have other people that have lost their employment already on the edge, just getting a few $1,000s. And the charities went overboard raising money for people that were already protected through their jobs, through the Victims' Compensation Fund. So the role of charities here is to fill in the cracks and meet the needs that aren't being met by the far bigger players.
And isn't this in part because people give to those things which make them feel good, and the firefighters and the police were so central to our lives, and the workers, I think from 90 countries, or I've forgotten exactly how many, in the World Trade Towers restaurant up there, some of them even illegal, seemed to fall through the cracks for a while.
Right, because people don't want to think about some of the innocent people and people going through the hardships. And it's harder for the charities to raise money for those people. The charities tend to raise money for people that have the biggest emotional pull. So we have to do is, when we have to ask the charities as the public and say what's really needed, who are the people not getting helped, and insist that the charities help those people, not help people that are already getting a lot of it.
One last question. I really appreciate your time. How much fraud did you come on?
Very little. So far, maybe $1 million, which isn't much considering it's probably up to $3 billion that it was raised. So there needs to be a lot more coordination. There needs to be a database set in place to kind of root out this fraud so people won't be double dipping.
But $1 million in over $1 billion is...
Yeah, it's very small. There may be more, but yeah, certainly that was fortunate that there wasn't a lot of fraud.
I appreciate you coming.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much. And I want to turn to government now, because it was 10 days after the attack that Congress established what's called the Victims' Compensation Fund. It was created as part of that multi-billion-dollar bailout package for the airline industry. And the aim was to distribute compensation to the families without delay, certainly, but only, this is very important, only if they agreed not to sue the airlines or anyone else in relation to the tragedy. And you may recall the payments to each family would be based on quite an elaborate formula that took several factors into account. I want to ask now, how effective has the fund been? And we're going to turn again to Cynthia McFadden.
This is the Brian. This is the Brian Moss claim. Brian was your husband.
Right.
Your husband.
We were married almost 10 years.
10 years, and he was in the Pentagon on that day, right?
What you are watching is a government official tell a widow how much her husband's life was worth in dollars and cents.
I have to look at the economics. I mean, it's a brutally sort of cold thing to do, but that's the way the statute works. I have to look at the economics of each individual, whether it's a victim or an injured person. Or whatever.
The widow is Mary Lou Moss. The official is Ken Feinberg, the man in charge of the federal fund that was created by Congress to compensate victims and survivors who lost their loved ones on September 11th. Although Feinberg is legally required to consider certain factors, his discretion is enormous and unprecedented.
These meetings give you a pretty good indication, give or take a little bit, what the number will be.
How does Feinberg put a price tag on each of the lives that were lost on September 11th? He uses a formula that he and his staff created. Here's how it worked for Mary Lou Moss and her 2 children. First, he automatically awards $250,000 for the deceased person's pain and suffering, and $100,000 for the surviving spouse and each dependent. Total, $550,000. Then he calculates the family's lost income, based primarily on the victim's salary when he died. Brian Moss, 34, was making $55,000 a year. Over the course of his career, that would amount to about $1.4 million. Finally, Feinberg is required by law to subtract life insurance, employee pension funds, and other offsets from the award. $550,000. The grand total?
The closest number right now, subject to corroboration, is around $1,450,000.
Feinberg's decisions are final and cannot be reversed by anyone.
I guess I was happier seeing the outcome of this than I anticipated. I anticipated getting a lot less.
Thank you, everybody.
So far, only 175 people of the nearly 3,300 eligible for the fund have completed their applications. The filing deadline is December 2003.
Well, we are joined now by Ken Feinberg, who is the special master of the September 11th Victims' Compensation Fund. Mr. Feinberg, thank you. I'm a little surprised and somewhat admiring that you come out in public, because while a great many people think you're absolutely brilliant and the right person to do this and deeply sympathetic, some of the families think you're the most awful person. I know you know this, so I'm not telling anything surprise. And that you are sort of settling their lives by a formula. Tell me, first of all, how hard's that for you, and which person are you really?
It's very difficult. I didn't fully anticipate the degree of emotion and anger and depression associated with September 11 families until I did what I think you have to do in this job, and that is go out and meet them. There's no substitute I've found in sitting down with the families in groups or individually and hearing what their concerns are, the future, the past, and try and deal with it as best you can with a statute that's fixed.
Do you think it's made you a more sensitive person?
I hope it has.
I realize there's some psychobabble in that question.
Well, I hope it has. It certainly opened my eyes to some of the suffering that September 11 caused.
Now, there are a lot of people who are eligible for money through the Victims' Compensation Fund if they choose. How many have chosen, roughly?
700. About 25%, a little less, have already filed. And the 700 have filed. There are only, Peter, to date, 11 lawsuits. That tells you, I think, the program is working. I predict that by December 2003, you'll have 90% of the families participating in the program.
And why do you think so?
Because, well, there are a couple of reasons. I'd like to think the main reason is that the families will come to realize that the program is unprecedented in its generosity. Congress, no country would do what we've done on this. And I think they'll come to realize that. I also think they'll do it because they want some small degree of psychological closure and move on with their lives after this anniversary. And finally, a technical reason. Congress stacked the deck. Anybody who litigates against the airlines or the World Trade Center will not win the case. They will not win the case. And if they win the case...
Do people actually know that? Do people, some people may be hanging back thinking, yes, I'll sue the airlines and maybe there's justification, and you actually believe that the deck is stacked against them?
Well, I personally don't think they can win the case. Secondly, even if they win after litigating for, in our system, 5, 6, 7 years, they'll have to pay their lawyers 40%. The amount they can recover is capped by Congress. There's not enough money to pay all the claims, even if they did win. In the alternative, they come into this program, and once they accept my award, they get paid tax-free within 20 days.
2 questions. You put people through a 190-page form. There must simply be people who can't do that.
We'll sit down with them. I regret that the form is complicated, but understand, Congress said you must compute economic loss suffered by the victim. Well, computing economic loss case by case by case in which you will receive $1, $2, $3, $4 million tax-free, unfortunately, the application is complicated. We will sit with the families and help them fill out the application.
Am I correct, last question, that the median settlements, the middle settlement so far is $1,348,000?
That's right. Half the people are getting more than $1.3 million, half the people are getting less than $1.3 million. We are, and I think that will continue. I think that at the end of the program, the average award for each of these people, these family members, will roughly be 1.5, 1.8.
What's the lowest amount that anybody's getting?
Anybody who files will get $250,000 no matter what, just for filing the application.
And the most awarded?
Oh, I think we'll have some awards that will be high. I can see some.
People who made more money will get more money.
That's right. And of course, there's a big debate whether Congress was wise in allowing people to get varying amounts depending on income, but Congress decided that, and will enforce the law as the law was enacted.
I do not envy you. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and see us.
Thank you.
Today, Ken Feinberg, who is the master of the September 11th Fund, Old English title for a very tough job. Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to turn now back to how we responded as a nation to the attacks. I don't know that anybody was surprised after September 11th, but people in other countries were, but there was this astonishingly visible reaction in form of patriotism and solidarity that has not been seen in the country probably since World War II. Expressions of it were everywhere. We're seeing it again now on the anniversary in the form of the American flag.
I want to give you a sense of what it's like here in Times Square right now. Because if you look outside, we have hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people standing outside, just stopping still, a kind of respectful witness, looking up at the screens where we're broadcasting the pictures. They can't hear the sound. They are simply looking at the wordless horror and standing to show, in a way, respect. And I want to show you something else, because people have been sent home from Times Square, and across the way, the construction workers who were building the Toys R Us building next door to us just hung their signs outside. God bless America, and pray for families and victims.
This is the White House, the flag on the flagstaff at the White House. Boy, that'll happen all over the country now, being lowered to half staff.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America.
And so this scene on the steps of the Capitol building tonight, just as the sun was going down, was very, very moving.
From the mountains to the prairie, to the ocean, wide we roam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
In some respects, that's an even more touching moment today, because Linda Douglas, our Capitol Hill correspondent, reviewed for us earlier how much tension there was in the leadership of the Congress just before that all occurred, and they were quite upset at the vice president. The leadership had all been taken away and put in safe and secure places. And everybody sort of being politicians and being political leaders, particularly, everybody thought they might want to be in charge. Then they came together on the steps, and it was a magnificent moment. Do you remember how much we talked in the ensuing days after September 11th about the impact on American culture? How would Hollywood react? How would Broadway react? One magazine editor at the time declared that irony was dead. Comedians, remember, Dave Letterman included them, Jon Stewart, and others questioned when it would be appropriate to laugh again, and it took them a long time to come back and be themselves, all the while we needed them. The film industry was reassessing, at least at the time, the kind of films that it had in production. But like a lot else about this story, those people who predicted a major transformation of American culture, wrong. Here's ABC's David Wright.
At first, there was culture shock. The trivial and the vain were banished for a while. Commotion simmered down.
9/11, more than anything else, was a disruption of our cultural narrative, of the story we use to understand who we are. It was a shock to the system.
It's terribly sad here in New York City. We've lost 5,000 fellow New Yorkers, and you can feel it. You can feel it. You can see it. It's terribly sad.
Pretty soon, levity became a patriotic duty.
New York City is open for business. Saturday Night Live is one of our great New York City institutions, and that's why it's important for you to do your show tonight.
Can we be funny?
Why start now?
Sometimes a little awkwardly, pop culture struggled to connect.
All right, now it's our turn to help.
After September 11th, we were trying to make sense of it all, searching for meaning. It was a time that separated the artists from the mere celebrity.
Without your sweet kiss, my soul is lost, my friend. Tell me, how do I begin again? My city's in ruin.
You're simply writing in a new world. You're living in a new world. The world was very different. And what you were thinking and the way you were writing was contextualized by new experience and by the experiences that everyone had on that day.
Addressing the tragedy directly was hard.
Where were you when the world stopped turning that September day?
Country singer Alan Jackson, for one, felt a little uncomfortable when a song he wrote late one night and performed for the first time at the Country Music Awards shot his new album to the top of the country charts.
Did you feel guilty cause you're a survivor? In a crowded room, did you feel alone?
I just didn't know if I wanted to write a song about it, first of all, because I didn't want it to look like I was using some tragedy to benefit from it, you know, my career, and I didn't want to come across that way at all.
Hollywood, too, has struggled, not sure of just what note to strike.
This is one of those things that is just too serious, too scary.
Television has tried, directly.
Are you telling me the Kumari defense minister may have ordered an attack on the Golden Gate Bridge?
We're not ready to say.
Or obliquely.
But we have to show them a good time. It's our patriotic duty as women of New York.
Many producers have tipped their hats to the victims of 9/11. On the final episode of Ally McBeal, Ally moves to New York. Her parting gift?
It's a necklace. It's the remains of the Trade Center.
It's beautiful.
This is the necklace, designed by producer David E. Kelley's sister-in-law, Rona Pfeiffer. After the broadcast, dozens of them were auctioned off on eBay, and the proceeds went to benefit the victims of the terror attacks. movies don't seem to have changed much at all.
As far as the movie industry, it would seem that the net effect of September 11th was nil.
Movies are still as violent as ever, but the violence seems abstract because the villains are so unreal. Notice how the terrorists in movies don't ever look like Osama bin Laden.
There's almost a perverse desire on the part of Hollywood to whitewash, it seems to me, the connection between militant Islam and world terrorism.
Little by little, the culture is absorbing all this, processing it, even laughing at its absurdity.
We are now under the auspices of Homeland Security. And they had to be very careful picking that name, Homeland Security. You couldn't say Fatherland because a lot of old Germans are going, that's a good one.
Who am I? 1 year later,
I'm Spider-Man.
Pop culture overwhelmingly betrays our nostalgia, our wish to get back to the way things were before. This summer, conspiracy, fear, and survival were once again forms of entertainment. Reality as an escape from reality. David Wright, ABC News, Hollywood.
I remember we're all in the country different about this. We all have different temperature levels about this. Some people wanted Letterman to come back even before he came back. Jon Stewart the same. And I think it was Charles Krauthammer, the columnist, if it wasn't, I apologize, who wrote recently in one of these reappraisals on the first anniversary, American frivolity is one of the world's joys. It is the expression of an unprecedented happiness, and so we should never be self-conscious about it. Mr. Krauthammer, I think it was his point of view. One thing we know about September 11th, it has been the most documented moment in American history. Immediately after September 11th, several museums across the country began to collect artifacts from the day. These are very different artifacts in many respects than you're accustomed to seeing in the museum. Many are personal items, including clothing, cell phones, even emails. It's been a very difficult task for some of the curators at the Smithsonian particularly, and today in Washington, some of those artifacts went on display at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History as part of an exhibit which is actually called Bearing Witness to History. ABC's Michelle Norris has been over there for part of the day. I haven't seen the exhibit. I know we're a little bit part of it in some respects, but it must be very moving for you.
Peter, it's extraordinary. The Smithsonian is home to many of the nation's artifacts, which tell us what it really means to be an American. What's interesting about this, what's extraordinary really, is that the museum had to collect history as it happens. And we'll walk through and show you some of this here. As you said, the museum, the installation here is called Bearing Witness to History, and the gallery here will look a little bit empty, which is unusual because it's been packed all day long. The exhibit opened today. They've had 5,000 visitors so far. It is the single largest opening of an exhibit here at the Smithsonian.
Really?
In many ways, because we're here in Washington, this is the heart of the exhibit. What you see here is, it used to be a television. It is now twisted steel and rubber. And in the Navy Command Center in the Pentagon, workers were watching the television, watching the events unfold at the World Trade Center in New York when a plane struck their building. And many of the people who lost their lives in the Pentagon were right there in that center. Here we see a red door. This belonged to a rescue truck that was right outside the Pentagon when the plane hit. Two workers crouched behind this truck, and actually the truck shielded them from danger. The blast was so strong that it actually blew the back end of the truck off. The exhibit shows us in many ways how everyday items have become extraordinary, and even small items speak to the moments of extreme heroism. What you see here is actually the handle for a squeegee. A window washer was stuck at the 50th floor, had no way to get out, used the squeegee to carve through 3 layers of sheetrock so he and 5 other men could crawl through this little teeny opening, work their way down to the bottom floor, and they escaped the building. They got out just 5 minutes before the building collapsed altogether.
Let me interrupt you for just 1 second, because it's a fascinating tour. Has the Smithsonian been inundated by stuff?
Actually, it's been relatively easy for them to collect items because Congress asked them specifically to collect artifacts. So, you know, it's not always easy to get places like the Pentagon to contribute items, but they've found it to be quite easy, and people have been more than willing to participate in this exhibit.
Why don't you go on for a minute?
Well, one of the things that we wanted to show you here is another example of how everyday items take on extreme significance. What you see here is a telephone, and this is the phone that Ted Olson, the country Solicitor General of the United States, where he received those last calls from his wife, Barbara Olson, who was aboard Flight 77. And we're going to take you around the corner here, and what you see here are items from the World Trade Center. And for people who have not found their way to New York, who've only seen this on TV, this steel column from the 70th floor gives you a real sense of the destruction from that day. We also see the truck from Fire Truck, one of the first squads to respond that day, Brooklyn Fire Squad #1. They lost 12 firefighters that day, and then the last of this, one of the few remnants they actually found from the planes that struck the building that day.
Michelle, let me just ask you one last question, because I almost missed it. I assume they've cleared the place out so that you could work in there, which is very nice. But you said this was the largest opening they'd ever had at Smithsonian?
So far, they've had 5,000 people come through. When they opened this morning at 10 a.m., there were 50 people waiting at the front door. And it's in many ways, when we as journalists talk about stories, we talk about a story or the story. This exhibit shows that there are many, many stories, and people come through, they're asked to leave a remembrance when they leave, to write down what the day meant to them, how their lives have changed. It's really quite extraordinary.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Michelle Norris, at the Smithsonian. Interesting way for people to connect on this particular day. We will be back. More than 300 search and rescue dogs were brought into work through the hazardous debris of Ground Zero. Many dogs suffered from cut paws and stinging eyes and problems breathing. Only one service dog was known to be lost. He was a bomb-sniffing dog with the Port Authority Police, and his kennel was in the South Tower.
I'm in a New York state of mind.